Welcome to our cozy audio lounge. Make yourselves comfortable and leave your worries behind. The story you are about to hear will not leave you indifferent. Nina still remembered that evening in detail. The music was so loud you almost had to shout, and the camera flashes seemed to capture their every move, every turn of the head. 5 years at the same university, but they only met at graduation. "Are you from the School of Business?" Mark asked, offering her a glass of champagne. His gray eyes held such genuine interest that Nina immediately forgot her intention to leave early. "And you're from law school. We crossed paths at an interfaculty conference once, but I didn't dare approach you." He smiled. That smile captivated her then, and that smile was with her now, as she stood tired after her shift, in the doorway of her bedroom, staring bewildered at a huge portrait of Mrs. Peterson hanging opposite their marital bed. "What?" The words caught in her throat. Nina rushed to the closet where their favorite graduation photo was kept, a picture where she and Mark, beaming and happy, looked at each other, oblivious to the world. The photo wasn't there. 3 years of marriage. 3 years that Nina considered happy, despite all the difficulties. 3 years during which Mark's mother, living in distant Phoenix, Arizona, systematically poisoned their lives with every phone call, every message, every casual remark. "Marky, you haven't lost weight, have you? Is Nina feeding you well? Son, you sound tired. She probably nags you constantly. Tell your beloved that a real wife shouldn't stay late at work when her husband is home alone." Nina endured it out of love for Mark, who would only smile awkwardly each time. Mom just worries. She's like that with everyone. But a week ago, Mrs. Peterson arrived in person to visit her son, and hell materialized in their 2-bedroom apartment, which they rented in a quiet suburb of Chicago. "Mark," Nina cried, coming out of the bedroom, "did you see what your mother did?" From the kitchen came her mother-in-law's voice. "Don't shout like that. You're not in a marketplace. And what did I do? I just cleaned up, which this place clearly needed." Mrs. Peterson emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands with a towel. At 52, she looked trim and well-groomed, dark hair without a single gray strand, impeccable makeup, an elegant sheath dress. Everything screamed of a woman used to being the center of attention. "Where's our photo?" Nina tried to speak calmly, but her voice trembled betrayingly. "That's vulgar." Her mother-in-law wrinkled her nose disdainfully. "I put it away. You're adults, but you act like teenagers. It's improper to display such photos prominently." "Vulgar?" Nina gasped in outrage. "We're just standing next to each other." "Oh, no need the way you're looking at him there. It's just improper. My portrait, however, is a reminder to Marky of who the most important woman in his life is." Mrs. Peterson said this with such a smug smile that Nina wanted to scream. "The most important woman in Mark's life is me, his wife, ma'am." Her mother-in-law stepped closer. "Wives come and go, but a mother is a person's only one. Remember that, girl?" Just then, the lock clicked in the hallway, and Mark entered. He looked tired after a day's work, but his face brightened at the sight of his mother. "Mom, did you already make dinner? You shouldn't have. Son, your wife comes home so late you would have starved to death waiting for her cooking." Mrs. Peterson kissed her son's cheek, casting a triumphant glance at Nina. "Mark, we need to talk." Nina tried to take her husband's hand. "Maybe after dinner." He smiled guiltily. "I'm so hungry." Nina felt everything clench inside. Food. Always food. More important than her feelings. More important than their relationship. "Of course," she said dryly. "Dinner it is." Dinner turned into a monologue by Mrs. Peterson about the hard life in Phoenix, how much she missed her son, and how irresponsible young wives were these days. Nina silently poked at the salad with her fork. which her mother-in-law had prepared according to a special recipe. And do you remember, Marky, how I used to make you this salad when you were little? You just loved it. Mrs. Peterson placed a hand on her son's shoulder. Of course I remember. Mom, you always made everything delicious. Your wife, I see, is indifferent to cooking. The fridge was empty. I had to run to the grocery store. I just didn't have time, Nina began, but her mother-in-law interrupted. There should always be time for family, darling. Remember that. After dinner, when Mark went to shower, Nina started clearing the table. Mrs. Peterson continued to sit, watching her daughter-in-law with unconcealed disdain. I found some cheap trinkets in your closet and threw them out. I hope you don't mind. Nina froze. Which trinkets exactly? Well, there were some glass figurines, clearly Chinese knockoffs. They just took up space. That was my grandmother's collection. Nina's voice trembled. They were Czech glass. Oh, well, excuse me, her mother-in-law replied, completely unrepentant. I don't know anything about that. They looked cheap. Nina felt tears welling up in her throat. That was the last memory of the grandmother who raised her after her parents died. A collection of small glass animals that her grandmother had collected all her life. Where are they? She barely managed to ask. In the trash can, where they belong. Mrs. Peterson shrugged. Nina rushed to the kitchen trash can. There, among the peelings and packaging, lay the shards of broken figurines, a small glass deer her grandmother brought back from a trip to Prague, a bird with a golden beak, a gift from her grandfather. Everything was shattered. Did you break them on purpose? Nina asked softly, picking up the shards. They slipped from my hands. Her mother-in-law smiled innocently. It happens to anyone. Mark came out of the bathroom, whistling a tune. What happened? He asked, seeing his wife squatting by the trash can. Your mother broke Grandma's collection. Nina looked at her husband with red eyes. I told you it was an accident, Mrs. Peterson exclaimed. Don't make me out to be a monster. Nina, why are you like this? Mark went to his wife. Mom didn't mean it. It's obvious. Obvious? Nina stood up, clutching the shards in her hand. The only thing obvious is that ever since she arrived, this house has been a nightmare. She throws out my things, rearranges everything as she pleases, hangs her portrait opposite our bed. And where did she put our graduation photo? Mark looked at his mother in embarrassment. Mom, is it true you hung your portrait in our bedroom? And what's wrong with that? Mrs. Peterson sniffed. I just wanted you to always remember that I'm here for you and will support you no matter what. But it's still our bedroom. Fine. Mrs. Peterson sighed dramatically. If my portrait bothers you so much, I'll take it down. I just wanted to do something nice. But the photo, Nina insisted. Where's our photo? What photo? You have dozens of them scattered around here. How would I know which one you're talking about? The one from graduation with Mark and me together. It was on the dresser. Ah, Mrs. Peterson waved her hand vaguely. I moved it somewhere. I don't remember. Nina knew her mother-in-law was lying. It was obvious from her eyes, from how she avoided direct eye contact. But Mark didn't seem to notice, or didn't want to notice. Mom, please don't touch our things without permission again, he said softly. And let's take your portrait down from the bedroom. Fine, of course. Son. Mrs. Peterson agreed with exaggerated readiness. I don't want to create problems. I was just trying to make your home a little more cozy. But if my daughter-in-law is so against it... She pronounced the word daughter-in-law with such disdain that Nina felt her cheeks flush. I'm not against coziness, she said, trying to speak calmly. I'm against someone throwing out my things and changing the decor in our home without asking. Oh my goodness, you're so sensitive. Her mother-in-law rolled her eyes. In my day, women were tougher. The evening ended in tense silence. Nina went to bed early, leaving Mark with his mother in the kitchen. Through her half-sleep, she heard their muffled voices and quiet laughter. Mrs. Peterson was telling her son stories from his childhood, and he was listening with delight, completely immersed in the past, forgetting the present, forgetting his wife lying alone. The following days became a real ordeal. Nina left for work early and returned late, but even in her absence, Mrs. Peterson continued her subversive activities. She rearranged things, threw out Nina's cosmetics. "It's expired, I'm taking care of you," rehung pictures, and constantly cooked, as if trying to prove that only she could properly care for poor Marky. Nina felt like a stranger in her own home. Every evening, she came home to an altered space, not recognizing her own apartment. And when she tried to put everything back, Mrs. Peterson would stage scenes, accusing her daughter-in-law of selfishness and misunderstanding. "Who am I doing this for?" she exclaimed, theatrically pressing her hand to her heart. "Only for your own good, and you don't even appreciate it." Mark avoided conflict. He tried not to intervene, saying, "You girls will figure it out yourselves. Girls will be girls." This sounded especially humiliating, equating 30-year-old Nina with his domineering mother-in-law. One evening, returning from work, Nina discovered that her desk in the living room had been completely reorganized. All the documents she had carefully arranged for an important project were stacked in one pile. The computer was moved, and in its place stood a vase with artificial flowers. "What is this?" Nina asked, entering the kitchen where Mrs. Peterson was feeding Mark another signature dish. "What are you talking about?" her mother-in-law asked innocently. "My desk." "You rearranged everything." "Well, yes, it was such a mess. I tidied up." "That wasn't a mess. Those were work documents. I specifically arranged them like that because I'm preparing an important presentation." "Oh, come on." Mrs. Peterson waved her hand. "Just put them back if you need them so badly. Don't make a drama out of nothing." "This isn't nothing." Nina raised her voice. "This is my job. I have a client meeting tomorrow, and now I'll have to spend all night sorting out what you've done." "Nina, please don't shout," Mark intervened. "Mom just wanted to help." "Help." Nina could no longer hold back. "Ever since she arrived, all she's done is interfere. She throws out my things, rearranges everything, criticizes my every move. And you let her do all this. You see, Marky, how nervous she is." "Mrs. Peterson said with a sigh. "And you wonder why you don't have children with the nerves like that." This was the last straw. Nina grabbed her bag and rushed out of the apartment, slamming the door. She wandered around the evening neighborhood, trying to calm down. Mark called, but she didn't answer. Not now, when everything inside her was boiling with resentment and anger. When she returned home, the apartment was quiet. Mark was sitting in the living room, watching TV with no sound. "Where's your mother?" Nina asked, taking off her jacket. "She went to bed. She was upset because you left." "She was upset," Nina smiled bitterly. "What about me?" "Did anyone think about my feelings?" Mark turned off the TV and turned to his wife. "I am thinking about your feelings. It's just that Mom, in her own way, is showing care. She doesn't mean any harm." "Mark." Nina sat next to her husband. "She deliberately does everything to hurt me. She invades our lives, remakes it to suit herself, and you let her do it. What do you propose kicking my own mother out?" "No. I propose you talk to her, explain that this isn't acceptable, and set boundaries." Mark sighed. "Okay, I'll talk to her tomorrow." Nina knew that conversation wouldn't happen. Mark always avoided confrontation with his mother. He was strong and decisive in everything related to work or friends. But in front of Mrs. Peterson, he turned into an obedient boy. The next morning brought a new surprise. Nina discovered that her mother-in-law had gone through her wardrobe and set aside several items for disposal, including Nina's favorite dress, the very one she wore on their first real date with Mark. "Why did you touch my things?" Nina asked when everyone was gathered for breakfast. "I just wanted to help you sort out your wardrobe." Mrs. Peterson smiled. "You have so many old things that just take up space?" "That's my favorite dress. I'm not going to throw it out." "Oh, that's tasteless rags." Her mother-in-law sniffed. "It hangs on you like a sack. Marky, tell your wife she could dress more nicely." Nina looked at her husband. His face showed agonizing awkwardness, but he remained silent. Silent again. The tension in the house grew day by day. Mrs. Peterson didn't miss an opportunity to needle her daughter-in-law, and Nina became more and more withdrawn, feeling she was losing this battle. Mark was caught between the two women, trying to please both and failing at everything. The climax came unexpectedly. Returning from work, Nina went to take out the trash and saw shards of glass in the bin. Looking closer, she realized it was the frame of their graduation photo. Pulling out the shards, she found the photo itself, torn in half. With the photo in her hands, Nina returned to the apartment. Mrs. Peterson was sitting in the living room, flipping through a magazine. "Did you do this?" Nina asked, showing the torn picture. Her mother-in-law didn't even look up from the magazine. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You tore up our graduation photo and threw it in the trash." "Oh, it just fell by accident and broke. And the photo tore when I was taking it out of the shards. Don't make a tragedy out of it." Just then, Mark returned. He immediately felt the tension in the air. "What happened?" Nina silently handed him the torn photo. Mark took both halves, slowly put them together. "Mom, did you do this?" "I already explained to your wife that it was an accident. The frame fell, the glass broke, the photo tore." "It was our favorite photo," Mark said softly. "Oh, well, go make 100 more." Mrs. Peterson replied irritably. "You're acting like children, honestly." Nina saw Mark's face change. For the first time since his mother's visit, she saw not bewilderment in her husband's eyes, but real anger. Mark resolutely closed the bedroom door, leaving Nina in the living room. Muffled voices came from behind the door. First Mark's calm tone, then Mrs. Peterson's indignant exclamations, turning into sobs. Nina clutched the remnants of the torn photo to her chest. On one half, smiling Mark in his graduation suit remained. On the other, she herself, looking at him with such adoration that even now, years later, she felt awkward at the sincerity of that gaze. Half an hour later, the bedroom door opened. Mrs. Peterson emerged with red eyes, pointedly not looking at her daughter-in-law. She went to the kitchen, making loud noises with dishes. Mark went to his wife and hugged her. "I talked to Mom. I explained that this isn't acceptable. And what did she say?" Nina rested her head on his shoulder. Mark hesitated. "She was offended, said she meant well, that I'm an ungrateful son, but I was firm." Unusual resolve sounded in his voice, and Nina looked at her husband in surprise. For the first time ever, he really stood by her side. "Thank you," she said softly. "I bought a train ticket." Mark smiled guiltily. "I'll take her to the station tomorrow morning." "You're serious?" Nina couldn't believe her ears. "Yes, I realized that this situation won't resolve itself. Mom got too carried away with her role." From the kitchen came the sound of breaking dishes and Mrs. Peterson's loud exclamation. "Oh my God! Everything is so inconveniently arranged here, Marky. Come help your mother." Mark sighed and went to the kitchen. Nina heard him patiently comforting his mother, helping her gather the shards. The evening passed in a suffocating atmosphere. Mrs. Peterson practically didn't speak to her daughter-in-law, addressing only her son, constantly sobbing and dabbing her eyes with a napkin. "You can't imagine how lonely I am in Phoenix," she read, looking at Mark with moist eyes. "After Dad, I have no one left but you, and you're so far away. Mom, you have friends, neighbors. You were always so sociable." Mark tried to object. "What friends at my age?" "Mrs. Peterson protested. "Everyone's busy with their grandchildren, and I don't have any." She cast a stinging glance at Nina. Nina felt a lump in her throat. The issue of children was painful. She and Mark had decided to wait. First, to get on their feet, save up for their own home. But her mother-in-law reminded them of the lost time at every opportunity. In the morning, getting ready for the station, Mrs. Peterson put on a real show. She slowly folded her things, stopping occasionally to catch her breath or wipe away a tear. "I didn't expect my son to kick me out like a stray dog." She sighed mournfully. "Mom, no one is kicking you out," Mark patiently countered. "It's just your vacation is ending. It's time for you to go home." Of course, Mrs. Peterson nodded. "My vacation, which ended a week earlier than planned. Apparently, I'm bothering some people too much." When Mark took his mother to the station, Nina was finally alone in the apartment. She walked through the rooms, putting things back in their places, throwing away what she couldn't save anymore. She found her favorite earrings, which her mother-in-law had accidentally shoved into a far drawer of the dresser. She discovered an expensive face cream tucked behind the toilet bowl. "It just fell there. I didn't notice." When Mark returned, they hung a new photo together instead of the damaged one. Not exactly the same, but also dear to their hearts, their joint selfie from a trip to San Diego last year. They were smiling, the ocean splashing behind them. "I hope your mom calms down," Nina said, looking at the photo. "I think so." Mark hugged his wife. "She just needs time. She's used to me always being there, always her protector. It's hard for her to accept that now you're in my life." Nina nodded, not wanting to argue. An inner voice told her that Mrs. Peterson would never accept her existence. But she didn't want to spoil the moment of reconciliation. Life gradually returned to its usual rhythm. Mrs. Peterson called her son every other day, sometimes testing the waters with questions like, "How's your beloved doing? Is she still nagging?" But Mark had learned to gently cut off such attempts, and gradually the calls became less frequent and shorter. 2 months passed. One evening at dinner, Mark unexpectedly suggested, "Maybe we should go visit Mom this weekend. She writes that she misses us." Nina froze with her fork in hand. "Are you serious after everything that happened?" "Nina, she's my mom. Yes, she went too far, but she's remorseful. She writes that she really wants to see us, promises to be polite." "Mark, she deliberately broke our photo, threw out my things, caused a real terror here. And now you want us to go visit her, where I'll be completely at her mercy." Mark frowned. "You're exaggerating. Mom can be difficult, but she's not a monster, and she's truly lonely." "And I'm not to blame for her loneliness," Nina said firmly. "I don't want to go to Phoenix, but I want to visit Mom." Mark's voice took on a stubborn tone. "And it would be great if you came with me." "Why, so she can humiliate me at every turn again." "She promised everything would be different." Nina smiled bitterly. "And you believe her?" "Yes, I do. She's my mother, Nina. No matter how difficult she is, I can't just cut her out of my life." Mark pushed his plate away. Nina looked at her husband, his stubbornly pressed lips, his determined gaze. She knew that look. Mark had already made up his mind. "I'll think about it," she finally said, though her inner voice screamed, "No way!" The next few days were spent in tense reflection. On the one hand, Nina didn't want to face Mrs. Peterson again, especially on her home turf. On the other hand, She understood that refusing to go would only confirm her mother-in-law's worst suspicions that she was taking her son away. In the end, after much internal torment, Nina agreed to the trip. They took time off from work on Friday and Monday to spend a long weekend in Phoenix. "You'll see, everything will be fine," Mark assured her as they packed their suitcases. "Mom will behave herself." Nina nodded, but the anxiety wouldn't leave her. She remembered her mother-in-law's gaze, cold, evaluating, full of dislike. Such feelings don't disappear in a couple of months. The train to Phoenix was long. Nina looked out the window at the passing scenery and thought about the upcoming meeting. What would Mrs. Peterson say? How would she look at her? Would she try to humiliate her in Mark's eyes again? "What are you thinking about?" Mark asked, sitting next to her on the bunk. "Your mom," Nina answered honestly. "About how this meeting will go. Everything will be fine," he repeated like a mantra. "Mom promised." Nina wanted to say that Mrs. Peterson's promises were worth less than the paper they weren't written on, but she kept silent. She didn't want to argue right before arriving. Mrs. Peterson met them at the platform. She looked refreshed, tanned. The Phoenix sun clearly suited her. Seeing her son, she rushed to hug him. Then, as if remembering herself, she turned to Nina. "Hello, dear." She smiled stiffly. "How was your trip?" "Fine, thank you," Nina replied just as stiffly. "Well, let's go home. I've prepared your favorite dinner, Marky." Mrs. Peterson took her son's arm, practically pushing Nina aside. Her mother-in-law's apartment was bright and spacious, a 3-bedroom with an ocean view in the distance. Tastefully furnished, though a little old-fashioned. "Make yourselves at home." Mrs. Peterson gestured to the sofa in the living room. "You'll sleep here. I've already prepared everything." "Mom, maybe you could let us have the bedroom," Mark suggested. "The sofa isn't very comfortable for two." "Oh, son," Mrs. Peterson lovingly objected. "My back is bad. You know, I need an orthopedic mattress." Nina noticed the quick, triumphant glance her mother-in-law cast in her direction. The first small victory not allowing the young couple to have privacy and comfort. Dinner passed in a tense atmosphere of politeness. Mrs. Peterson asked her son about his work, occasionally addressed Nina with general questions, but mostly ignored her presence. She constantly put the best pieces of food on Mark's plate, saying, "You're so thin. You barely eat." "I guess." After dinner, Mrs. Peterson suggested looking at family photo albums. Of course, with Mark's childhood photos. "Look how cute he was." She showed Nina the pictures as if Nina had never seen them before, even though they had already thoroughly examined these albums. "And here we are at the beach. I always tried to give him the very best." "Yes, Mom, you were always so caring." Mark smiled, not noticing how his mother cast a triumphant glance at Nina at those words. Before bed, Mrs. Peterson explained at length how to pull out the sofa bed, where the bedding was, how to make it properly. Nina listened in silence, feeling like a naughty schoolgirl. "And please, don't make noise at night. I'm a light sleeper," her mother-in-law added finally. "The walls are thin." When they were finally alone, Nina collapsed onto the makeshift sofa bed. "Oh my God, what a day," she whispered. "I think everything's going pretty well." Mark was unpacking his suitcase. "Mom's trying to be friendly? Are you kidding?" Nina propped herself up on her elbows. "She barely talks to me, only to you, and those constant hints." "What hints? I think you're exaggerating." Nina sighed. It was useless to explain. Mark didn't see, or didn't want to see, the subtle barbs his mother was aiming at his wife at every opportunity. The night on the sofa bed was a nightmare. It creaked with every movement. Springs dug into her side. and the blanket was too thin for the cool Phoenix night. Mark, however, fell asleep instantly, while Nina lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the days ahead. In the morning, they were woken by the clatter of dishes in the kitchen. Mrs. Peterson was making breakfast, loudly clanging pots and pans. "Good morning, sleepyhead," she exclaimed when a sleepy Mark appeared in the kitchen. "I made your favorite pancakes." "Thanks, Mom." Mark yawned. "But you didn't have to get up so early." "Nothing is too much trouble for my beloved son." Mrs. Peterson kissed his cheek, casting a quick glance at Nina, who had just entered. "And good morning to you, too. Will you have pancakes?" "No, thanks. I usually just have coffee in the mornings," Nina replied. "Oh, what nonsense!" her mother-in-law exclaimed. "You can't start the day without a proper breakfast. No wonder you're so thin. Sit down. I'll serve everything now." Nina reluctantly sat down at the table. Mark, oblivious to the tension, eagerly devoured the pancakes. "Mom, you're always the best," he praised, eating his third pancake. "No one makes pancakes better than you." "Of course, son." Mrs. Peterson stroked his head like a small child. "I know what you like." After breakfast, Mrs. Peterson suggested a stroll along the boardwalk. The day was sunny, and the walk could have been pleasant if not for her mother-in-law's constant attempts to push Nina aside and monopolize her son's attention. "Marky, remember how we used to walk here when you were little?" she chirped, holding his arm tightly. "And that's where your favorite carousel used to be. Too bad it's gone now." Nina walked beside them, feeling like a third wheel. When she tried to join the conversation, Mrs. Peterson either ignored her remarks or replied curtly and immediately changed the subject. At a cafe on the boardwalk, Mrs. Peterson insisted they sit at a table by the window with an ocean view. Just how Marky likes it. The table was small, meant for two, and Nina had to pull a chair from a neighboring table, sitting at the very edge, almost outside their small circle. "Mark, you didn't forget that we have a meeting with your old friends tomorrow?" Mrs. Peterson asked, stirring her tea. "Steve and Mike really want to see you. They both work here now. Can you imagine?" "No, you didn't tell me." Mark looked surprised. "But it would be great to meet them." "Nina, you don't mind, do you?" "Of course not," Nina replied, though she had a premonition that she would feel like an outsider at this meeting, too. "Excellent." Mrs. Peterson clapped her hands. "I've booked a table at a restaurant for tomorrow evening. Your whole old gang will be there." Nina noticed how her mother-in-law avoided eye contact when saying this, clearly up to something. In the evening, while Mark was showering, Nina decided to have a direct conversation with Mrs. Peterson. She found her mother-in-law in the kitchen, washing dishes. "Mrs. Peterson, may I speak with you?" "Of course, dear." Her mother-in-law didn't turn around, continuing to scrub a plate as if it had centuries of grime on it. "I'm listening." "I feel there's still tension between us, and I'd like to fix it, for Mark's sake." Mrs. Peterson finally turned around, wiping her hands with a towel. "Fix what?" She smiled an unnatural smile. "I don't have any problems with you, but you constantly—" Nina trailed off, choosing her words. "You don't let me feel like part of the family. You constantly push me away from Mark." "What nonsense!" Mrs. Peterson sighed theatrically. "You're just too sensitive. I'm merely looking after my son. And if you don't like it, well, that's your problem. I also look after him," Nina said firmly. "He's my husband." "Ah, yes, husband." Mrs. Peterson pursed her lips. "A temporary status, you know? But I'm his mother. Forever." "What do you mean by temporary status?" Nina felt a chill inside. "Nothing special." Her mother-in-law smiled her fake smile again. "Just stating a fact." Marriages break up, especially when wives think more about their careers than about creating a cozy home for their husbands. Mark and I love each other, and he supports my career. Of course, of course. Mrs. Peterson took up the dishes again. Just mark my words. Sooner or later, he'll get tired of a cold bed and an empty fridge. Men are creatures who need care, warmth, comfort, and you're always running around offices. Just then, Mark entered the kitchen, fresh from his shower. "What are you two talking about?" he asked, sensing the tension. "Women's talk. Son." Mrs. Peterson quickly replied, "I was just telling Nina the recipe for your favorite pie. Maybe she'll surprise you with some homemade baking for once." Nina clenched her fists, feeling anger rising inside, but she held back. She didn't want to cause a scene in front of Mark, knowing he would again take a neutral stance, unwilling to argue with either his wife or his mother. The evening dragged on endlessly. They watched old movies that Mark loved as a child, and Mrs. Peterson commented on every scene with memories. "And do you remember, Marky, how you were afraid of this part and used to hide in my lap?" Finally, when they went to bed on the creaky sofa, Nina whispered to her husband, "Your mother still hates me." "Oh, come on," Mark mumbled sleepily. "She just needs time to get used to things." Time. How much more time does she need? Let's talk about this tomorrow. Okay, I'm tired. Nina turned on her side, feeling hot tears sting her eyes. She didn't understand why Mark couldn't see what was obvious. His mother would never accept her, would never treat her as a family member. The next day brought new challenges. Mrs. Peterson suggested showing them the real Phoenix, not just the tourist spots. They walked for a long time through narrow streets, climbed hills overlooking the bay, visited several historical sites, and all the while, Mrs. Peterson continued her policy, ignoring Nina's questions and comments, interrupting her when she tried to tell Mark something, constantly distracting her son with memories of the past. "And this is where you first rode your bike. Remember?" She pointed to a small square. "You were so funny, always falling but stubbornly getting up and trying again." "I vaguely remember." Mark smiled. "I must have been 5 or 6. I was so proud of your perseverance then." Mrs. Peterson cast a quick glance at Nina. "Too bad that quality sometimes fails you now." "What do you mean?" "Well, you know, sometimes you shouldn't be so stubborn. But listen to the advice of your loved ones." She looked pointedly at her daughter-in-law, "especially those who've known you all your life." Nina turned away, pretending to examine the facade of an old building. She couldn't listen to these veiled digs anymore. In the evening, dinner with Mark's friends awaited them. Mrs. Peterson announced that she had booked a table at one of the best restaurants in the city. "Only, Nina dear," she added with feigned concern, "there's quite a strict dress code there. Do you have anything suitable?" "I have a dress," Nina replied, referring to the black cocktail dress she had thoughtfully brought with her. "Oh, that one with the open back." Mrs. Peterson winced. "I'm afraid it's too provocative for such a place. Maybe I can lend you something." Nina imagined herself in one of her mother-in-law's old-fashioned outfits and shuddered. "Thanks, but I think my dress will be perfectly fine." "As you wish." Mrs. Peterson shrugged. "I just don't want you to feel awkward." When Nina emerged from the bathroom in her dress, Mark whistled. "You look amazing." Goodness, Marky, what an expression. Mrs. Peterson winced. "You're acting like a schoolboy." She cast a critical glance at Nina. "Well, it's acceptable. Just put a cardigan on top. Evenings are cool now." The restaurant was indeed exquisite, with an ocean view, soft lighting, and impeccable service. 4 men, roughly the same age as Mark, were already waiting at the table. "Marky," one of them exclaimed, standing up to greet him. "Long time no see." The restaurant glowed with warm lights, and Mark's friends with genuine smiles. They hugged, clapped each other on the shoulders, exclaimed, recalling school pranks. Nina stood slightly apart, feeling like a ghost at this celebration of life, visible but intangible. And this is my wife, Nina. Mark finally remembered her, pulling her close. The men smiled politely, nodded. Someone mumbled a compliment, but their interest in her immediately faded as the conversation returned to shared memories. Remember when we were in gym class, one began, and that time with the chemistry teacher, another chimed in. Mrs. Peterson sat at the head of the table like a queen on a throne, occasionally interjecting her comments. And I got you all out of trouble with the principal, remember? She seemed to have arranged the seating beforehand. So Nina was at the far end of the table, almost outside the general circle. Nina sipped her wine, occasionally engaging in polite conversation with Mike, a friend of Mark's sitting next to her, who, unlike the others, at least tried to include her in the conversation. "How long have you and Mark been together?" he asked, leaning towards her. 3 years married, dated for a year before that. Nina smiled, glad for the chance to talk to someone. "Oh, congratulations. And how do you like life in Chicago?" "We like it. We have a nice apartment. Interesting jobs." From the other end of the table came Mrs. Peterson's loud voice. "Marky, why don't you come back to Phoenix? Your father always said that real life is here. The ocean, the sun, peace. Not the Chicago hustle and bustle." Nina froze with her glass in hand. So that was it. That was the real purpose of this dinner, this meeting with friends, to lure Mark back into the bosom of his hometown, under his mother's wing. "Yeah, Marky, come back," one of the friends seconded. "I just had a spot open up at my firm. They'd snatch you right up. And the salary's good," another added. "Not Chicago money, of course, but enough for life by the ocean." Mark smiled awkwardly, glancing at his wife. Nina saw a mix of nostalgia and confusion in his eyes. "Thanks, guys. But Nina and I have good jobs in Chicago." "Jobs, Mrs." Peterson waved her hand. "What's a job compared to the quality of life here? The air is clean, the fruit is real, the people are kind. And what do you have in your Chicago traffic jams? Smog, and an endless rat race for money." Nina felt everything clench inside. She knew Mark missed his hometown, especially in winter when Chicago blizzards reminded him of the warm Phoenix sun. But they were building their life together in the capital, where both had career prospects. "Mom, we'll discuss this later," Mark said softly. "Now's not the time." Of course. Mrs. Peterson feigned agreement, but Nina noticed her mother-in-law exchanging significant glances with one of Mark's friends. Dinner continued. Nina felt increasingly alienated from the cheerful company. The conversation kept returning to the topic of Mark returning to Phoenix, but without direct proposals now. Instead, there were stories about how good life was for their friends here, what their prospects were, how wonderfully their children were growing up. Children. Another painful topic. Nina noticed how Mrs. Peterson livened up when one of the friends showed pictures of his twins. "Look, Marky, what wonderful little ones Steve has, and you're the same age as him. It's high time you brought grandchildren to your mother." Nina felt blood rush to her cheeks. Everything was planned. Every remark. Every turn of the conversation. Her mother-in-law was systematically cornering them. "Mom, Nina and I decided to wait with children," Mark said firmly. "First, we want to get on our feet, buy our own apartment." "Get on your feet," Mrs. Peterson sniffed. "At your age, your father and I were already raising you, and we managed fine. And years are passing, you know. After 30, it's harder for a woman to get pregnant." She cast a meaningful glance at Nina. "Mrs. Peterson," Nina finally decided to intervene. "Mark and I will decide when to have children." "Of course," Of course. Her mother-in-law shook her head. Just don't say I didn't warn you later. Nina felt Mark's hand find her fingers under the table and squeeze them. This silent gesture of support somewhat calmed her, but her inner voice continued to scream, "Careful, it's a trap." The evening ended late. They returned to Mrs. and Peterson's apartment, tired and silent. Her mother-in-law immediately went to her room, citing a headache, but Nina suspected it was just a ruse to leave them alone. Let Mark ponder what had been said at dinner. "Did you like my friends?" Mark asked when they lay down on their creaky sofa bed. "They're good guys," Nina replied cautiously. "Especially Mike. He's very nice." "Yeah, Mike was always the most sensible of us." Mark chuckled. "You know, it's strange to be back among high school friends, like time stood still." Nina was silent, not knowing how to approach the main topic. But Mark brought it up himself. "Did you hear Steve's job offer here?" "Yes." Nina turned to him. You're thinking about it." Mark sighed. "I don't know. Sometimes I miss Phoenix, the ocean, this pace of life. In Chicago, everything's so fast, so hectic. But we have a life there. Mark, work, friends, plans." "I know." He kissed her forehead. "And don't worry, it's just idle thoughts. Let's sleep. Tomorrow's another day with Mom." Nina lay awake for a long time, listening to her husband's steady breathing. Something subtly changed today, as if an invisible wedge had been driven between them, thin, almost imperceptible, but already beginning its destructive work. Morning brought a surprise. During breakfast, Nina's phone pinged with a notification. She looked at the screen and almost dropped her coffee cup. "What happened?" Mark asked, noticing her reaction. "I've been offered a contract in Singapore." Nina stared at the screen, disbelieving her eyes. "For a year, with the possibility of extension. This is amazing." "Singapore?" Mark frowned. "So, you're leaving for a year?" "Not me." "Us." Nina grabbed his hand. "There's a branch of your company there. You could request a transfer. Think about it. It's a chance for both of us. New experience, international practice. Plus, the salaries there are completely different." Mrs. Peterson, who had been silently listening until this moment, let out a sound like a stifled chuckle. "Singapore, well, I'll be..." She shook her head. "Marky, just think. Yesterday you were offered to come home to the ocean, to your friends. And today your wife wants to drag you to the other side of the world." "Mom, it's just a coincidence." Mark still looked bewildered. "Nina didn't know about yesterday's conversation when she applied for this project." "I applied 2 months ago," Nina confirmed, "and I didn't even hope they'd choose me." Well, Mrs. Peterson pursed her lips. "What a lucky coincidence." "It really is luck." Nina tried to ignore her mother-in-law's tone. "Mark, can you imagine what this means for us? We can save up for a down payment on an apartment in a year or two, instead of 5 years as planned. And are you sure Marky will be so easily transferred?" Mrs. Peterson asked shrewdly. "You know, not all employees are considered indispensable at a company." Nina felt a chill inside. Her mother-in-law was clearly trying to hit Mark's most vulnerable spot, his professional pride. Last year, he was passed over for a promotion, and he still felt sensitive about it. "Mark has an excellent reputation at the company," Nina said firmly, "and extensive experience that will be valuable in any branch." Of course. Mrs. Peterson smiled her fake smile. "And if not well, he can sit at home while you pursue your career. Many modern men live like that." Mark tensed. Nina knew these words hit their mark. For Mark, who grew up with traditional ideas about a man's role in the family, the thought of his wife being the sole breadwinner was almost unbearable. "No one will be sitting at home," Nina said, trying to speak calmly. "We'll both be working, just in a different country. in a country where you don't know anyone, where there's a foreign language, foreign customs. Mrs. Peterson continued, and here, it's your hometown, friends, family, and Mom as she gets older. It's harder to be alone. She pressed her hand to her heart and closed her eyes as if she felt unwell. Mom! Mark rushed to her. What's wrong? Nothing, nothing, she replied in a weak voice. Just a little dizzy. It happens often lately. The doctor says my heart is acting up. Nina barely managed to suppress her irritation. She had no doubt this was another performance. All these years, Mrs. Peterson had used her fragile health as a weapon to manipulate her son. Maybe we should call an ambulance, she asked, knowing the answer beforehand. No, no need. Mrs. Peterson made a weak gesture with her hand. Just, Marky, give me my pills. They're in the cabinet in the bathroom. Mark rushed for the medication. Left alone with her daughter-in-law, Mrs. Peterson suddenly straightened up and looked at her coldly. So, Singapore. Her voice no longer held any trace of weakness. Very convenient, isn't it? To take my son to the other side of the world so I can't see him. It's not because of you. Nina met her gaze. It's an opportunity for both of us. For you. Her mother-in-law snapped. Only for you. Mark will be a nobody there, an errand boy in a foreign country where his experience is useless. You don't know that, but I know my son. Mrs. Peterson interrupted. I know what's important to him, respect, recognition. And what will he get there? He'll be in your shadow, playing second fiddle. Mark's footsteps were heard, and Mrs. Peterson instantly reverted to the image of a weak, ailing woman. She leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes. Here, Mom, your pills. Mark handed her a glass of water and a blister pack of medicine. Thank you, son. She smiled gratefully, swallowing the pill. You always take such good care of your old mother. Nina turned away so as not to see this performance. She understood that she had fallen into a perfectly laid trap. Whatever she said, whatever she did, it would be used against her. If she accepted the job offer in Singapore, she would become selfish, destroying her family for her career. If she refused, she would miss an opportunity she had dreamed of for years. Mark was pensive and quiet all day. They walked around Old Town Phoenix, but Nina saw that her husband's thoughts were far away. Mrs. Peterson stayed close to her son, sometimes complaining about weakness, leaning on his arm, asking him to sit down and rest. Excuse me, I need to reply to this email, Nina said when they returned home. They're waiting for my decision. Of course. Mark nodded. I'll talk to Mom for now. Nina locked herself in the bathroom, the only place where she could be alone, and took out her phone. She wrote to her manager that she accepted the offer but needed a couple of days to discuss the details. She couldn't miss such a chance, but she also didn't want to make a final decision without talking seriously with Mark. Coming out of the bathroom, she found her husband and mother-in-law talking quietly in the kitchen. They fell silent when they saw her, and that silence was more eloquent than any words. I said I needed to think about it, Nina said. I wanted to discuss everything with you first. That's right. Mark nodded. It's a serious decision. Mrs. Peterson stood up, swaying dramatically. I'm going to lie down. I don't feel well today. When her mother-in-law left, Nina sat opposite her husband. Mark, let's talk frankly. This is an incredible opportunity for both of us. A year or two in Singapore, and we can save up for a down payment on an apartment. You'll have experience working in an international branch. It's a step forward for both of us. Mark rubbed the bridge of his nose, a gesture that always betrayed his inner tension. Nina, I'm not sure I can go with you. Why, Mom? She's really not feeling well lately. The doctors are talking about a possible heart operation. I can't abandon her now. Nina felt everything drop inside her. Mark, You believe this. She's manipulating you. She's always manipulated you. It's not manipulation. Mark frowned. She really has heart problems. She showed me the doctor's report. And when was the last consultation? When were these tests done? What's the difference? Mark raised his voice. You talk as if my mother makes everything up? Because she does make it up. Nina couldn't hold back anymore. She does everything to control you, to keep you next to her, not me. That's ridiculous. Mark stood up. Mom has always wished me nothing but good. You don't see how she manipulates as soon as I got a job offer, talks about her heart condition immediately started, about how she can't be left alone. It's all part of her plan. Stop it! Mark slammed his fist on the table. You're talking about my mother, Nina, about the woman who raised me. Nina felt tears welling up in her eyes. She knew she was losing this battle. Mrs. Peterson had sunk her claws too deep into her son's mind for him to break free. Fine, she said softly. I'm not forcing you. Decide for yourself. Nina, listen. Mark softened, seeing her state. I'm not saying no forever. Just not now. Wait a little until Mom gets better. Then we can go together. And if she doesn't get better, what if in a year she comes up with something else? I promise. Mark took her hands. As soon as Mom recovers, I'll come to you. Maybe even in a couple of months. Just don't make me choose between you right now. Nina pulled her hands away and went to the window. She looked at the Phoenix rooftops, at the distant ocean, and understood that her marriage was falling apart. She was faced with a choice: give up a career opportunity for a husband who couldn't stand by her, or leave alone, risking losing him forever. I accepted the offer, she finally said, without turning around. I'm flying in 2 weeks. You can come when you're ready, she heard Mark's heavy sigh. I understand, he said after a long pause. It's your decision. Such disappointment sounded in his voice that Nina barely resisted the urge to give up everything just to not hear those notes. But she knew that if she backed down now, Mrs. Peterson would win completely, and then their marriage would not survive anyway. It would slowly suffocate under the control of her domineering mother-in-law. The remainder of their stay in Phoenix passed in tense silence. Mrs. Peterson, feeling her victory, softened slightly towards her daughter-in-law. Now, her gaze held more condescension than hatred. She even tried to pretend that she supported Nina in her career aspirations. Of course, dear, I understand how important this is to you, she said with a fake smile. And don't worry, I'll take care of Marky while you're away. Nina saw through the game, but no longer argued. Everything was decided. On the last evening, as they packed their suitcases, Mark tried to ease the tension. I'll call every day, and I'll definitely come as soon as I can. Of course, Nina smiled weakly. I understand your mother needs you now. She didn't believe her own words, but she didn't want to part ways in an argument. Something told her that if they left carrying resentment and unspoken words, their marriage might not withstand the upcoming separation. In the morning, Mrs. Peterson saw them off at the station. She looked impeccable, no traces of the heart attack that supposedly happened 2 days ago. Goodbye, Nina dear. She hugged her daughter-in-law with fake warmth. Good luck in Singapore, and don't worry about your husband. I'll take care of him. On the train, Nina remained silent for a long time. Looking out the window, Mark tried to talk to her, telling her about his plans, how soon he would join her. But his words sounded empty, unconvincing. I love you, he said as they approached Chicago. That won't change, even if we're far apart. Nina rested her head on his shoulder. She wanted to believe. She truly wanted to, but an inner voice whispered, You've already lost. She won't let him go. 2 weeks in Chicago flew by in a blur. Nina dealt with documents, her visa, packed her belongings. Mark helped, but she felt that part of him was no longer with her. His thoughts kept returning to his mother, to her illness, to his promise to take care of her. At the airport, he hugged her so tightly it was hard to breathe. "I'll come," he whispered. "I promise." Nina nodded, not trusting her voice. She passed through passport control, turned around one last time. Mark stood with his palm pressed against the glass. She raised her hand in a farewell gesture and walked towards the boarding gate, feeling the distance between them growing with each step, not just physical distance. Singapore greeted her with humid heat and dizzying skyscrapers. New job, new people, new rhythm of life, all of it captivated and swept her away. For the first few weeks, Nina fell asleep as soon as she reached her rented apartment. Small but cozy, with a view of the city park. They called each other every day. He talked about his new job in Phoenix, not as prestigious as in Chicago, but with good prospects, about how he was helping his mother, how she was gradually recovering, about his plans to visit Nina in the coming months. But months passed, and the promised visit kept being postponed. First, Mark's mother had a minor operation and needed constant care. Then, he started an important project at work that he couldn't leave. Then, he started talking about financial difficulties. Tickets to Singapore were expensive. Nina offered to pay for his flight. Her salary allowed it. But Mark refused, saying it was a matter of principle. She understood his pride wouldn't allow him to accept such help from his wife, especially after all the conversations about his inadequacy that Mrs. Peterson surely continued to have. Nina's first anniversary without her caught Mark off guard. He sat in his mother's kitchen, aimlessly stirring his cold tea when his gaze fell on the calendar, a red dot on today's date 3 years since their wedding. He hadn't put it there himself. It was Nina's habit to mark important dates with small red dots. The phone was silent. They hadn't spoken in 2 weeks. The last call had turned into a formal exchange of news, interrupted by an awkward pause and a hasty, "I have to run. Talk later." "Marky, why are you so gloomy?" Mrs. Peterson appeared in the kitchen in a new silk robe. Her hair was styled in a fashionable updo, and her face shone with impeccable makeup. The heart condition that just 6 months ago supposedly prevented her from reaching the bathroom on her own was now only hinted at by a pillbox on the shelf, untouched, covered in a thin layer of dust. "Just thinking." Mark pushed his cup away. "Today's our anniversary." Mrs. Peterson pursed her lips, but quickly replaced disapproval with a caring smile. "Oh, son, life goes on. She made her choice. Work is more important than family. And you're too good to waste yourself on a woman who doesn't appreciate you." Mark wanted to argue, to say that Nina appreciated their family, that she was waiting for him, calling him to her, but the words caught in his throat. What was the point of arguing? His mother would twist every phrase to make Nina out to be selfish and him a victim. "I'm going to work." He stood up from the table. "Don't wait up for dinner. I might be late. Just don't stay too long at that office of yours." Mrs. Peterson threw up her hands. "You're working for pennies there, and you've been coughing for almost a month. Health is more important." Mark silently nodded and walked out to the landing. He stopped, leaning against the wall. A dull irritation was building inside him. That office of yours, that's what his mother called the construction firm where he worked as a simple engineer, even though in Chicago he had managed an entire department. For pennies, even though his salary was enough to support his mother, pay the bills, and even save a little. He walked along the morning streets of Phoenix, breathing in the ocean air, and thought about how much everything had changed in the past year. Nina in Singapore was building a successful career. She was promoted, praised in professional publications, and he was stuck in a provincial firm, doing work below his qualifications, living with a mother who became more demanding every day. The phone vibrated in his pocket. Mark took it out, his heart pounding. Maybe Nina. But it was just a notification from his banking app. His salary had arrived. He sighed and silenced his phone. The whole day passed in a haze. He checked calculations, coordinated plans, nodded at meetings, but his thoughts were far away. He remembered last year's visit to Phoenix, the moment Nina received the job offer, and how everything went downhill after that. After work, he didn't go home. His feet instinctively carried him to a small bar by the ocean where he and Nina had once sat until dawn, making plans for the future, plans that had shattered against reality, against his mother's manipulations, against his own weakness. "What'll you have?" The bartender, a young guy with a trendy beard, wiped the counter in front of him. "Whiskey. Double." Mark ran a hand over his face. "And can I charge my phone?" "Sure, here's an outlet." The bartender nodded to the wall next to the counter. Mark plugged in his phone and took a sip of the burning drink. The screen flashed, showing several missed calls from his mother and a new email. He opened his mail, scrolling past promotional newsletters, and froze. An email from a lawyer. Subject: divorce proceedings. His fingers trembled as he opened the document. Dry legal phrases blurred into one indistinct stain. But the essence was clear: Nina had filed for divorce. She wasn't demanding property division, wasn't asking for alimony. She just wanted to officially end a relationship that had effectively ended almost a year ago. Mark ordered another whiskey, then another. The bartender looked at him sympathetically but didn't try to engage in conversation, for which Mark was grateful. He didn't want to talk. He only wanted to drink and forget. Forget that his marriage was over, that Nina no longer believed in their shared future, that all their dreams had crumbled. Around midnight, his phone blared. His mother. Mark dismissed the call, but a minute later, she called again. "Yes, Mom." He tried to speak clearly, hiding his intoxication. "Marky, where are you? I'm worried. It's late, and you're still not home." Mrs. Peterson's voice trembled with tension. "I was out." Mark lied, looking at the empty bar. "I'll be home soon." "What friends at this hour?" his mother protested. "You have work tomorrow. Get home immediately." Mark was 33 years old. He was an adult man, an engineer with a college degree, and his mother was scolding him like a schoolboy. And the worst part was, a part of him accepted it as normal. "I'll come home when I want to," he suddenly said, surprised by his own resolve. "Don't wait up for me." He hung up the phone, ignoring his mother's indignant exclamations, and chugged his whiskey. "Another?" the bartender asked. "No, I think that's enough." Mark paid and stepped out into the cool night. He walked along the ocean, listening to the sound of the waves. Nina had filed for divorce. The end, a period. Why didn't he feel relief? After all, their relationship had long ago turned into a formality, rare calls, awkward pauses, avoidance of important topics. They hadn't seen each other for almost a year. She was building a new life in Singapore. He was here in Phoenix. It was time to admit the obvious: they were no longer a couple. Mark stopped at the railing, looking at the dark waves. One thought spun in his head. How did it come to this? When exactly did he lose control of his life? When did he allow his mother to decide for him? When did he stop fighting for his own happiness? The answer was simple: he never truly fought. He always took the path of least resistance. Mother is unhappy with Nina. Easier to nod and pretend everything is fine. Nina asks him to protect her from her mother-in-law's attacks. Easier to say, "You girls work it out yourselves." Mother manipulates him into staying in Phoenix. Easier to agree than to confront her tears and accusations. And here's the result. He lost his wife, his career, his self-respect. And what did he get in return? A position below his qualifications. Life with a mother who treats him like a child, and emptiness inside. Mark returned home long past midnight. The lights in the apartment were on. His mother was waiting. He quietly opened the door, hoping to slip into his room unnoticed. But Mrs. Peterson was sitting in an armchair in the hallway, wrapped in a blanket. Finally! She jumped up. I was going crazy with worry. Where were you? Why didn't you answer my calls? I was out. Mark leaned tiredly against the wall. I wanted to be alone. Alone at this hour with that cough of yours. You want to get pneumonia. Normally, Mark would nod in agreement to such tirades, but today, something inside him snapped. Mom, I'm 33 years old. I can decide for myself when and where to go out. Mrs. Peterson gasped, clutching her hand to her chest. Is that how you talk to your mother now? After everything I've done for you, I didn't sleep at night when you were sick. I denied myself everything so you could get an education. I know. Mark interrupted. You were a good mother. But I'm not a child anymore, and I'm tired of the control. Control! Mrs. Peterson theatrically threw up her hands. I'm just taking care of you. Who else will take care of my boy? My wife could have, Mark said softly, if you hadn't interfered. For a moment, fear flashed in Mrs. Peterson's eyes, fear of exposure, but she quickly composed herself. Your wife, she sniffed, who abandoned you for her career, who didn't even call today on your anniversary. Nina filed for divorce, Mark said in an even voice, though everything inside him clenched with pain. Mrs. Peterson fell silent, clearly not expecting such news. Then her face softened into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Well, you see, I told you she didn't appreciate you. Honestly, I'm even glad. You deserve better. Son, someone who will be there, who will create a real family. She was there. Mark interrupted the flow of his mother's eloquence for the first time. It was I who didn't go after her. I chose you, not her. And you know what? That was a mistake. In the ensuing silence, the clock on the wall could be heard ticking. Mrs. Peterson looked at her son with wide eyes, as if seeing him for the first time. What are you saying? The truth. Mark straightened up. You manipulated me my whole life, especially the last year. Your illness miraculously worsened every time I talked about going to Nina, and just as miraculously subsided when I stayed. How can you... Mrs. Peterson clutched her heart. I really do have health problems. Doctors confirmed it. Doctors confirmed minor age-related changes, Mark said harshly. I saw your medical records when I picked up the test results. You didn't need any operations. No constant care. Mrs. Peterson blanched, then her face contorted with anger. You dug through my documents, spied on me. Didn't spy. I just finally decided to check if what you were telling me was true. And you know what? Almost everything turned out to be a lie. Mrs. Peterson sank into the chair, deflated like a burst balloon. Her mask of a confident woman cracked, revealing a scared, aged face. I just wanted you to be close, she whispered. You're all I have. And for that, you destroyed my marriage, my career, my life. I was protecting you. Mrs. Peterson raised her head. That Nina of yours, she would have taken you to the ends of the earth. You would have been a nobody there, in her shadow. But here, you have friends, your hometown, prospects. What prospects? Mom. Mark smiled bitterly. A job below my qualifications, living with you until old age. Is that your plan for my future? You could have found another wife. Mrs. Peterson's eyes narrowed. A good, homey girl who would have given me grandchildren. Grandchildren for you, Mark repeated. Everything always comes down to you. My life, my marriage, my career. Everything must be subservient to your desires. He walked past his mother into his room and began taking things out of the closet, packing them into a bag. Mrs. Peterson appeared in the doorway, watching his actions with growing panic. "What are you doing?" "Leaving," Mark replied without turning around. "For Chicago. I'll try to go back to my old company. If not, I'll find something else." "You can't leave." Mrs. Peterson ran up to him, grabbing his arm. "You can't abandon me." "I'm not abandoning you, Mom." Mark gently freed his arm. "I'll call, send money, but I won't live with you anymore." "It's all her." Mrs. Peterson started shouting. "It's your... Even after the divorce, she's destroying our family." "No, Mom." Mark closed his bag. "You destroyed my family, and I let you do it. We're both to blame." He walked out of the room, leaving his mother sobbing on the bed. In the hallway, he stopped to put on his jacket, and his gaze fell on a photo on the wall, him in his graduation suit, young and smiling. Nina should have been next to him, but her part of the photo was neatly cut off. He hadn't even noticed when his mother did it. Mark took the photo off the wall and put it in his pocket. One last glance at the apartment that, in a year, had never truly felt like home, and he closed the door behind him, ignoring his mother's cries. Chicago greeted him with a raw November rain. Mark stepped out of the airport, inhaled the cold air, and for the first time in a long time, felt free. He rented an inexpensive apartment in a residential area, called his former colleagues, and sent his resume to several companies. His return to his old firm didn't work out. His position had long been filled, but experienced engineers were valued in the construction industry, and within a week, Mark had 3 job offers, not as prestigious as before, but with room for growth if he proved himself. His mother called every day, crying, threatening, begging him to come back. Mark patiently listened to her but remained unyielding. He sent her money, asked about her health, but firmly cut off any attempts at manipulation. "Mom, if you're really not feeling well, call a doctor. If you need surgery, I'll pay for it. But I'm not coming back to Phoenix." Gradually, Mrs. Peterson resigned herself. Her calls became less frequent, and their conversations calmer. She even started asking about his work, his plans. Perhaps for the first time in her life, she began to see him not as Marky, her little boy, but as an adult man with a life of his own. Mark signed the divorce papers without objection. Nina's lawyer was surprised by his compliance. Usually, divorce proceedings were accompanied by disputes over property, mutual accusations. "I have nothing to divide with my wife," Mark explained. "Everything we had in common. I've already lost." In the evenings, returning from work to his empty apartment, he often took out that graduation photo, the one cut off, with emptiness where Nina should have been. Sometimes he imagined her living in Singapore, the bright lights of the metropolis, skyscrapers, new friends, a new life. Had she tried to find happiness with someone else? Had she been able to forget his betrayal? He tried to find her on social media. But Nina seemed to have deleted all her accounts or simply changed her name, starting life with a clean slate. Her work email no longer responded. She had changed companies or positions. One day, browse a professional magazine. Mark stumbled upon an article about an international construction conference in Singapore. Among the speakers, Nina Smith was mentioned. She now used her maiden name. A tiny photo showed her at a podium, confident, beautiful, with a short haircut instead of the long hair he remembered. Mark stared at that photo for a long time, trying to discern in this successful woman his Nina, the one who looked at him with loving eyes at graduation, the one with whom they built plans for the future, the one he lost due to his own weakness. In the spring, as Chicago was awash in blossoming apple trees, Mark was offered a position on an international project, a significant promotion, interesting work, opportunities to travel. He accepted without hesitation. Life was gradually improving, day by day. His relationship with his mother also changed. Mrs. Peterson no longer tried to control his life, no longer threw tantrums if he didn't call for a couple of days. Perhaps she finally understood that excessive overprotection led to the loss of her son, not his retention. Perhaps she simply accepted the inevitable. In any case, their communication became healthier, as much as possible after everything that had happened. But sometimes, especially on quiet evenings, Mark would take out his most precious relic from his desk drawer, a sliver of the graduation photo, cut off with emptiness instead of Nina, a symbol of what he had lost, a reminder of a mistake that could no longer be corrected. He touched the glossy surface of the picture, remembering that evening the music, the laughter, the feeling of endless possibilities. They were so young, so naive, so confident in their future. What would that young couple have said, knowing how it would all end, that Nina would build a successful career in Singapore, and Mark would try to piece together the fragments of his life in Chicago, that they would be separated not by distance, nor time, nor other people, but by his own mother and his inability to resist her manipulations. Sometimes Mark imagined a different scenario where he found the strength to resist his mother, where he flew to Nina in Singapore, where they built a new life together. But fantasies remained fantasies. Reality was here in an empty apartment, in a cut-off photo, in the irreversibility of time. Perhaps someday he would find the strength to start all over again, with another woman, with other dreams. Perhaps Nina had already found her happiness on the other side of the world. Perhaps they both needed to go through this ordeal to grow. But today, looking at the photo where they were so young and happy, Mark knew only one thing. He would never forget that love, and would never forgive himself for letting it slip away. Outside the window, spring, Chicago hummed. A future lay ahead, uncertain but full of possibilities. Mark carefully put the photo back in the drawer. Tomorrow was a new day, a new attempt, a new life. But a part of his heart would forever remain there, at the graduation party, where he and Nina looked at each other and believed that their love was stronger than anything in the world, even stronger than a portrait hanging opposite the bed.